Vendor Self-Service. My name is Kenny Pointer, and I am the Executive Director of NASACT, and I'll be serving as your host for today's event. We're joined today by approximately 350 government accountants and auditors and other interested parties from 32 different locations located across the United States. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide an overview of e-procurement and vendor self-service. During today's session, we will define solutions, discuss the market adoption, and describe impacts on spend, operational efficiencies, and legislative and policy mandates. The Commonwealth of Kentucky and the state of Alabama will discuss their current e-procurement vendor self-service landscape, achieved benefits, challenges, and goals for the future. Lastly, we will discuss lessons learned and mitigation strategies to help you develop creative strategies to advance your e-procurement and vendor self-service solution. We're fortunate to have with us today Dale Kress. Dale is a project manager with Advantage Procurement with CGI, and Ed Ross, State Controller of Kentucky. We're scheduled to have with us Tom White, State Controller of Alabama. Unfortunately, Tom has had an unexpected emergency arise in the state, and he's having to take care of some state business this afternoon and won't be with us. But Dale is going to fill in and provide Tom's part of the presentation. And, of course, Tom will be available after today's webinar to provide additional detail or answer questions about the Alabama procurement system should you have those questions. More information on all of our speakers can be found in their bios, which were distributed to you in advance of today's event. Following the presentation, we will have about 20 to 25 minutes for live questions and answers. Today, we are allowing participants to receive audio through either their computer or their phone. And to ask your question, simply raise your hand, use the raise your hand function of our webinar software. Simply click on the hand icon that's located in the toolbar. Now, remember, if you are using your computer today and receiving audio through your computer must have a microphone for that process to work properly. If you prefer, you can just type your question and send it to us by using the Questions tab located in the webinar toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. Our speakers today will be using a PowerPoint presentation, which you should be able to see on your screen and was provided to you in advance. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties or problems, please contact us now. Our number is 859-276-1147. Again, that number is 859-276-1147. Just one final housekeeping announcement. In order for NASACT to be approved by the National State Boards of Accountancy as a group internet-based provider of CPE, we have implemented some attendance monitoring tools for individuals. Now, this applies only to those of you who are going solo today, participating in the event by yourself. And I know we do have a few of you today participating as individuals. In order to verify your attendance, please raise your hand now using the function in the toolbar. Again, if you're an individual, please raise your hand now using the function located in the toolbar. A moderator will lower your hand once we have recorded your attendance. Now, those of you participating in groups, you do not need to follow these instructions. Your attendance will be confirmed by your room monitor. Again, if you are participating as an individual, raise your hand now, and we'll lower that as soon as we have your attendance recorded. We'll give everybody just a second to comply with that. Okay, I think we have it. Now, for individuals, pay attention. We will have to test your attendance later in the webinar, and obviously these internal controls allow us to better comply with NASBA rules for granting continuing education credits. As you can tell, we have a pretty full agenda today, and I want to express my gratitude to both Dale and to Ed for taking time from their busy schedules to be with us today. With that as a brief background, let me turn the program over to our speakers. Dale and Ed, welcome to today's webinar. And Dale, I think you're going to lead us off.
Very good. Thank you, Kenny. And certainly welcome, everyone. Certainly appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Dale Kress. I've been with CGI for 25 years now in the public sector ERP and e-procurement space. I certainly look forward to talking to you this afternoon. As Kenny said, I am joined by Ed Ross, and he will talk to you about his specific experiences in Kentucky a little bit later on in the presentation. I think we're ready to do this initial attendance check. Is that correct, Kenny? Okay.
Dale, you can proceed. We've taken care of that.
Very good. Thank you. So the agenda we're going to follow today is spend a few minutes going through initial definition of e-procurement and vendor self-service. I expect that if I polled the audience and asked 15 of you, what does e-procurement mean to you and what is the scope of e-procurement? I expect I'd probably get back at least 5 different answers, as e-procurement continued to evolve since its infancy, 10, 15 years ago. And we'll talk through some of the introductory comments, and I'll go ahead and lead through the discussion on the experiences of the state of Alabama. Ed Ross will talk about his experiences with Commonwealth, Kentucky, and then we'll wrap up with lessons learned. So beginning with what is e-procurement, and how does that relate to your ERP, your financial management systems? So each of you has at least one financial management system, ERP. Many of you also, in conjunction with that, have some form of vendor self-service to facilitate, among other things, vendor registration. You have the ability for interested vendors to register to do business with you and identify those goods and services they can provide to you. Now, beyond that is what was formerly referred to as e-procurement. It's really the transactional side of the world. And this function now is commonly referred to as procure-to-pay. Again, your transaction life cycle that is extended to include things like electronic catalogs and shopping from those catalogs, receiving, three-way match, invoicing processes, and the associated payments to vendors. Now, in certain cases, the procure-to-pay functionality may exist as part of your ERP solution. In other cases, it may be a separate e-procurement solution providing those capabilities with the overlap and potential integration points with ERP, both at your financial management level, your funds availability checks, things of that nature, as well as the vendor self-service solution. Now, if we take it one step further and look at the holistic procurement life cycle, this is commonly referred to as source to settle. And that simply means we're taking beyond the typical transaction life cycle to include other things like sourcing or solicitation management, issuing and evaluating and awarding your request for quotes, your request for proposal, may include auctions, reverse or surplus auctions as an example. It also includes contract management, so the ability to manage your full contract life cycle from initial contract award through renewals and terminations and ultimate closeout of those contracts. And then finally, at the heart of it all is your spend analysis, the ability to have visibility into the way you're spending your dollars, whether it be for goods or services, and be able to leverage that information moving forward. So as we go through the rest of the presentation this afternoon, our focus really is on this holistic source-to-settle solution, which again may be functionality that exists within your ERP. It may be a separate solution, or for those of you who are not yet using e-procurement, could be one of those 2 different options for you moving forward. Now, specifically with regards to the solution market, the most recent reports from Gartner indicate that the procure-to-pay segment, again, your transactional processing, and I will point out Gartner also distinguishes between indirect spend versus service and other spend. So with indirect spend specifically, their estimation of the market penetrations in the 5 to 20% of target audience range, with mainstream adoption anticipated in the next 2 to 5 years. Whereas if you look at the entire source to settle, it's a less mature solution, whereas approximately 1 to 5% of the target audience has adopted that, with mainstream adoption predicted over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, a couple things to point out here in addition. One is, as you are all very aware, public sector tends to lag behind commercial sector, and so you might even see longer times to mainstream adoption across the public sector marketplace. The other thing I'll point out from Gartner that's not highlighted here on the slide is they are very clear that as a public sector entity looking for e-procurement, you should evaluate your options very carefully. Again, whether you do something as a result of your ERP solution or a separate e-procurement solution, but something that's focused and made for government, made for the public sector. There's certainly a number of different specific requirements that are applicable to the public sector that cannot necessarily be met by commercial sector e-procurement offerings. And we'll touch upon a few of those as we go through the rest of the session here. So moving on, how can e-procurement help impact your spend and improve operational efficiencies? One of the fundamental things that you can achieve through an e-procurement offering is visibility into your spend. The ability to aggregate and consolidate your spend. And this has been one of the historical challenges for those of you who don't have an e-procurement solution or might have a number of different disparate systems that really don't talk to each other. And so it can make it very difficult and challenging for you to even be able to identify what your current spend is, what your current contracts are, what your current spend patterns are, which then leads to difficulties in negotiating better rates as you renew those contracts or issue new contracts. So implementing e-procurement allows you to consolidate that spend, to be able to track it at a line item level, and line item being down to your commodity level. You can choose to use a number of different structured commodity codes to facilitate that data capture. Certainly the NIGP commodity structure is the most common, but clients certainly are using other commodity structures, possibly United Nations standard or other standards. But capturing that line item spend then helps you evaluate and understand what your spend patterns are. That will help lead to reduced cost of goods and services because, again, you're leveraging your buying power and helping drive down your overall costs. Having that spend available to you also helps you to better identify areas to increase your spend under management. In certain cases, you may have contracts in place where your end users aren't utilizing those contracts. Sometimes that's referred to as maverick or off-contract purchasing. So having better data through e-procurement allows you to identify those particular patterns whereby you may need to spend some time educating your users on the availability of the contracts and their expected use of those contracts. But then on the flip side, it allows you to help identify circumstances where you may not have contracts in place, but maybe you should. If you have high dollar or high volume purchases, certainly it may be great candidates for new contracts. Now next is procurement cards. Many of the organizations on the phone today have some form of procurement card or credit card program. Often those programs come with an associated rebate where you as a public sector organization get some form of rebate based on each purchase you make through your procurement cards. Well, e-procurement helps you to continue to extend and maximize your rebates through the use of procurement cards as the payment vehicle for any of your transactional processing. It would be simple small dollar purchases or even larger purchases depending on specific needs and the rules and regulations around the use of your individual procurement cards. From an operational efficiency perspective, doing things electronic in an integrated fashion helps throughout your procurement lifecycle. It improves transaction accuracy by reducing duplicate data entry, eliminating potential data entry errors as a result of that, and most importantly, it helps to reduce your cycle times. And that is a benefit to not only your internal users within your organization, but to your vendor community as well. In, again, reducing the support requirements and also streamlining and improving your cycle times. Very commonly, you'll see cycle improvements, for example, in going from order to receipt, just by virtue of communicating electronically with your vendors, whether that be email in less traditional fashion or truly electronic integration to a supplier's back-end system through an industry standard format such as CXML. It really helps improve that overall life cycle. Now, what are some of the legislative or policy mandates that might drive your e-procurement initiative or might influence your procurement initiative? Well, transparency, as most of you on the phone are aware, has become a huge, huge topic over the last 5, probably even 10 years. And most of you are faced with some form of transparency requirements. Certainly eProcurement, at the level of data you can capture, helps to facilitate and promote that transparency. Certainly the procurement process is one of those that tends to be looked at very carefully as people look to promote transparency in public sector. Supporting your local government entities. This is really the opportunity to benefit you as the larger organization, commonly the state-level organization, as you issue those statewide contracts. And you can issue the statewide contracts with or without eProcurement, and you can gain some of those benefits of having those statewide contracts and making them available to your localities. eProcurement affords you some additional benefits. One is to more easily capture the spend of those localities if you make your eProcurement solution available to them, which provides further visibility into your spend patterns and your total spend against contracts. Historically, that has been a challenge for most public sector organizations in that it ends up being a self-reported type of function. Whether that self-reporting is done by the individual localities themselves, or in some cases, you even turn to your vendors to report on the actual usage that was entered outside of the system. Deploying an eProcurement solution and allowing users to record those transactions directly allow you to capture that data without the added steps, inaccuracies, or other challenges of not having that information captured electronically. So it continues to benefit you, and then also benefits your localities, not only from being able to get your statewide or other negotiated contract pricing, but also to make available eProcurement solutions to them in cases where they may not be able to afford an eProcurement solution on their own. Next item is with regards to your supplier base and to be able to increase visibility and participation of your diversified vendor program. So small, minority, disadvantaged business vendors. Moving to an eProcurement solution and moving to an electronic world allows them to compete on a more level playing field, such that the end user doesn't necessarily need to know or care whether they're a very small vendor organization. Certainly they'll recognize your household names like Dell or Staples or Grainger and the like. But in cases where the smaller vendor, the end user doesn't necessarily need to know or care. I love some of the quotes that we got in working with the Commonwealth of Virginia as they deployed their eProcurement solution. And specifically from the minority and disadvantaged businesses. I remember one in particular that served a very small geographic footprint historically within the Commonwealth of Virginia. And as a result of eProcurement, we're faced with the good and bad challenge of increased business, and particularly business across the entire Commonwealth. So the bad was that they now need to start taking into consideration shipping and other associated costs that historically the business hadn't had to worry about. But the good side was the increased visibility and increased business through the Commonwealth. So a tremendous way to increase that and help promote your various disadvantaged business programs. Lastly is increasing competition. This is a great example of a public sector need and public sector requirement. Yes, you will have your strategic sourcing initiatives where you will limit the supplier community you interact with and focus on a subset of your suppliers for targeted spend categories. But in most instances, the public sector wants and needs to make any and all business opportunities publicly available. You need to do that through a public website, typically your vendor self-service site, and allow vendors to come and review those opportunities and to respond to those opportunities without the buyer needing to select some small subset of vendors to notify and participate in those various transactions. So eProcurement, in particular the vendor self-service component of eProcurement, can really help you in that area to do the online public posting, and in most cases those vendor self-service solutions will also offer electronic notifications, most commonly through email notification or the like. So that's a brief introduction to how we've defined eProcurement and vendor self-service for the purpose of today's discussion. It's also an introduction to the current market adoption from Gartner's perspective. And lastly, some of the key objectives or some of the key objectives or barriers potentially depending on your different legislative mandates or other mandates. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ed Ross and let him share with you his experiences with the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Ed?
Thank you, Dale. This is Ed Ross, and I'm going to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone, and talk about what we're doing in Kentucky. And first, it might be useful if I tell you a little about Kentucky. We have a population of about 4.3 million, annual budget of some $20 billion, which excludes capital projects. And we have a single statewide ERP system. All state agencies use this system, including the Transportation Cabinet, Executive, Legislative, and Judicial branches. We have all of the modules of the financial system, including enhanced procurement, vendor self-service, punch-out, and data warehouse that provides us with financial analysis data and or dashboard reporting. So that just gives you a little about our system. And we've, over the years, we've moved, let's say, from mainframe to client server to now a fully web-enabled financial system. So that's where we are today. I believe are we going to be on slide 9 now, Dale? We're, maybe it's the previous one, slide 9. Okay, here we go. Let's talk a little about current activities in Kentucky, and I'm going to approach this from the contract management, how our agencies use our systems, maybe the issues that come out, the evaluations and contract renewal process, from the sourcing side. We will helps you identify and locate the resources, be it GSA contracts, risk of services. This will enable you to get better competition and helps in finding, evaluating, and engaging suppliers. The procurement to pay, or as we used to call it, the cradle to grave operations, takes you from requisition through RFP, award of contract, payments, and then finally the evaluation of vendors. Sourcing and spend analysis, through the system we have, we can identify our vendors, the commodities and services that they provide, know what you spend, where you're spending it. We're able to manage the expectations, and then it provides us a flexible process for the acquisition of commodities, services, and equipment. And from this data that we are able to gather, then that provides us with the information to leverage and negotiate with vendors. And in Kentucky, we have many of our master agreement contracts or 5-year contracts. We'll issue a contract for 1 year with 4 options of 1-year renewals. And the best time and each time we renew a contract for an additional year, we look at it from the standpoint, do we actually need this service or commodity any longer, or are there certain line items we no longer need? And finally, we try to take an opportunity to negotiate better terms and conditions. And through that process, we have saved actually millions of dollars in our purchasing for the Commonwealth. Another important or essential procurement is the procurement card. Let's say there are substantial rebates you can gain. It facilitates small purchases, reduces the number of payments that you would make, and meets the needs of field staff. And there's a quick payment to the vendors, which keeps the vendors happy. And the illustration we like to use when we're trying to promote the use of procurement card, we use an example. If your carpenter shop needs a new hammer, and in the old way of doing business, you order the hammer from from some supplier. You create a purchase order, the hammer is delivered, you receive it, you sign off on an invoice, and you pay it by check. This $15 hammer now has probably another $40 of expenses added to it, and now you have a $15 hammer that costs you $55. The new way of doing business would be to cut out some of the front-end processes, pay for the hammer P card, and you're going to save, say, $15, $20, or $25 on the transactions. One hammer does not make or break your budget. However, if you have 400 or 500,000 transactions and you can save $15, $20, or $25 on each transaction, then you're going to save $8, $10, or $12 million annually, and then that becomes a worthwhile process. And we want to go to the next slide, Dale. I like to talk about our stakeholders in this process. And our stakeholders would be the buyers, the end users, vendors, citizens. And all of our procurement processes are web enabled. So workflow plays a vital part in all of this. And so for the solicitation management, we can register vendors, modify your solicitations, you post any required forms or templates online, you have vendor notification via email, and you can, all your requisitions are through workflow. You can amend or attachments are all provided through workflow and then put to our website. And then you can also review all the awards on the website. From the contract management standpoint, we can post our contracts. All of our approvals are by workflow. When we have contract renewals, we all do this through workflow. This cuts down on the number of approvals that you will need. All of our awards are automated. And then actually this encourages vendors, partnerships, and greater involvement. If you look at it from the catalog management, catalogs are provided to us by vendors electronically. Our buyers then go out and post the catalogs online on our website. And then the pricing specifications are all available to state agencies for their use and also to local governments. If you look at it from the end user's perspective, the end users pass all the information by workflow. There's buyer assignments are by certain commodities. Specifications are online. Order management standpoint, we order from master agreements, and when you go out to order some commodity, the purchase order is automatically generated when you select a commodity. And again, all your approval processes are really reduced to only 2 or 3. And then when we get to the payment process, depending on how the vendor has registered, we would pay a check, EFT, or P card. And from the vendor standpoint, through the vendor self-service, they can go out and register. They can see any solicitations the state has, and when they register for the commodities that they are interested in bidding on, and then they would automatically receive an email when we post an RFP for that commodity. Then you have equal access by all vendors, and again, this encourages competition. From the opportunity management, all solicitations are on VSS, and again, emails are sent to them for any changes or updates. And then also vendors can go out and search by commodity name to see if there's some commodity that they're interested in bidding on. The notification of awards are sent via email and then posted to VSS. If we looked at it from the standpoint of our citizens, all solicitations are available for citizens to see on VSS, or they can go to our Open Door Transparency website. From the contract management, again, citizens can go out online and see the contracts that have been posted and awarded, and hopefully we have, through transparency, have shown that we are getting the best value for the taxpayer. And on our catalog management, again, vendor payments are posted out on our Open Door website. And then we are now working on a one-stop shop portal, which will let the vendor register, secure business licenses, tax registration, and view any investment incentive programs all from one website. And we should have that operational very soon. And let's go to the next slide, Dale, if you would, which is 11, I believe. These are some charts that will just give you an idea of how the volume of business we do on catalogs and non-catalogs. If you will note there, we have some 1,800 catalog master agreements, non-catalog or something over 6,000. But what we're trying to illustrate here is that on your catalogs you have about 2.5 million lines of commodities, whereas on your master agreements we're only talking about 41,000 commodity lines. So the important point here is that you need to get your catalogs online, because that's where your greatest savings can be from the from an administrative cost standpoint. So you'll note there that 23% on the and 77% on the non-catalogs as to the number of master agreements. And then if you look at the lines again, that's 34% on catalogs versus 66% on the non-catalog. I want to go to slide 13 next. And this is just gives you an idea by catalog spend by commodity code. And you will note there that about 1.4 billion are miscellaneous services, which is mostly made up of medical services, medical managed contracts, and then computer software, highway construction are the top items there, and so we are able to buy, let's say in IPG code, go out and select off the dollar spend by commodities. And then this is useful, and we can also select it by vendor. This becomes useful to us when we are actually going out to with a RFP for a new contract, or negotiating when we go for contract renewals. And we want to go to the next slide there, Dale. And this one is the punch out. And let me talk a little about punch out. And first off, let me describe what we mean by punch out. Punch out is where that we go out and contract with a vendor through a software, that has the vendor to post the catalogs online for us. In other words, we go to the vendor's website and we can purchase items that are under contract from that website, similar to what you would do with Amazon. And when we in that way, we do no longer have to post the catalogs. Posting a catalog from a vendor sometimes is a cumbersome process. So to get them to post for us, and then we can purchase for them for the items that we've contracted to buy, is a great savings and convenience to us. So it's a streamlined, efficient ordering process. It reduces the cycle time because you post your order today, and they may even start delivery today or tomorrow. It's over a secure internet shopping website where you can pay by, feel safe in paying by P-card. And then there's increased contract compliance because, for instance, if you're buying desktop computers from Dell, you can have a, let's say, call it a Kentucky standard, which is that when you buy a desktop, it'll have certain attachments with it and software, and that would be the Kentucky standard. And when they go to order that item, it automatically creates all the software and attachments you should be acquiring with that item. This has been, we just started this process. We currently have 6 vendors and working on getting 4 more over the next few weeks. This has been really well accepted by our central buyers and from our agency buyers, and is working well for us, and something we look forward to, let's say, entering into contracts with several more vendors. I'm going to go to the next slide, Dale, which is 15. And let's talk about with any good thing, there are some risks and challenges. You're coordinating with multiple parties. You also have to hold the vendors accountable for the catalog items to make sure that they only post the items of which you've contracted to purchase. You're relying on the vendors' punch-out site stability, and then there's the process of educating buyers and users, and that has not been a great process. And sometimes a vendor will change a platform on you, which will give you a headache for maybe a couple of hours, but that's usually quickly remedied, and we've had that on one occasion. And I believe that concludes my part, Dale, and I will turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Ed. And just to follow on to Ed's comments with regards to punch-out, one of the questions you may have in the audience is, when do you want to use a punch-out catalog versus a traditional, or what's commonly referred to as locally hosted catalog, and kind of what's the numbers, if you will? Certainly punch-out has a great place and represents a small subset of your overall electronic catalog population. It's great for things that change frequently, pricing that changes frequently, or things that are highly configurable. So we commonly see punch-out used in computer hardware, your office supply vendors, your vendor community for MRO, and things of that nature. Is punch-out for any and all circumstances? No. As Ed described, there are some additional audit or risk capabilities you need to mitigate, and certainly these are very common practices. Punch-out's used extensively both in the commercial sector as well as the public sector. So it's just balancing that risk and identifying those right circumstances where it makes sense to stand up the punch-out catalog. But they can be very effective, and you can see great efficiencies as Ed's described here. With that, I'll turn it back over to Kenny for our next attendance check.
All right, thank you, Dale. Again, it is time for an attendance check. This applies only to individuals, but same test that you did earlier, just raise your hand, use the raise your hand function located in our webinar toolbar, and I think there are 14 of you today participating as individuals. Once we record your attendance, we'll lower your hand, keep that hand raised until we lower it. So we'll give everybody just a second to comply with that. While we're waiting, just remind people in terms of asking questions, some of you are already doing this, but if you'd like to go ahead and pose your question, type it in and send it to me. Use that questions tab located also in the webinar toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. Simply type your question, hit send, and we'll have that in the queue, and we'll bring those out during the live Q&A. As I mentioned, some of you are already doing it while the question's fresh in your mind, but I would encourage you to continue to do so. Okay, I think we've got everybody's attendance recorded. Dale, we'll go back to you. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. So moving on to the state of Alabama. Again, we had planned on Tom White joining us this afternoon. He was unable to make it. I will walk through his portion of the presentation this afternoon. Certainly I'll attempt to address and make questions that may be specific to Alabama as I can in the open Q&A, but we'll also encourage you to reach out to Tom if you have follow-up questions. So the state of Alabama and their procurement history and where they're at today, let's walk through that. So their history is one of a highly customized solution, a combination of online and batch processes supporting a number of different administrative functions, from accounting to financial reporting to payroll and procurement certainly being one of those components, and personnel functionality. So a number of different aging systems, and as you look specifically at their system landscape, it's a set of very disparate systems. So the state of Alabama operates a statewide payroll personnel system. They have a central accounting system that's used by a core group of agencies. They have an agency accounting system used by a number of individual agencies. And they have yet other accounting systems used throughout other agencies. And so just at that point, you can see just how complex their current application landscape is. And then you throw procurement in there, it is also a separate system. There are various interfaces and integration points to allow these systems to talk to each other in various ways. But just due to the aging infrastructure and the age of these systems, they are really lagging in terms of new, modern, fresh system and the capabilities and benefits that come from that. So the state of Alabama, about 12 or 18 months ago, looked for a way to modernize their various administrative systems and put a plan in place and are currently executing that plan to upgrade their various systems. They began with a financials proof of concept with a single agency, which went live October 1st of last year, so about 6 months ago. That was the launching point, if you will, for the broader statewide rollout. Their next activity, which is currently underway, is budget preparation, and that's due to go live about a year from now in 2015. Following budget preparation will be financial management, procurement, and vendor self-service, targeted for later in the fourth quarter of 2015, calendar 2015. So that's the plan they're executing towards, again, with a new solution and a future application landscape similar to what Ed described with Commonwealth, Kentucky, is moving to a single integrated statewide ERP that encompasses vendor self-service and procurement capabilities. So as they reach that new milestone, they will have a fully integrated solution for financial management, procurement, vendor self-service, human resource management, including payroll, budgeting, and a new and modern business intelligence solution. So they will be in a similar circumstance to where Ed and the Commonwealth are today. They're just another 18 months out in terms of moving towards that future landscape. Now, what were some of the drivers or objectives, if you will, as the state looked to move forward? From a decision process perspective, their goal was to replace a legacy procurement system with a new state-of-the-art and integrated system to streamline their processes, improve operational efficiencies, give greater visibility into their spend patterns, all of those types of things we've talked about in the beginning of this session. A few other specific notes, certainly reducing the total number of systems and interfaces, just reducing the complexity of their application footprint, whereby reducing or eliminating integration points, reducing or eliminating the associated reconciliation processes, supporting the full procure-to-pay cycle. So as Ed described, supporting that full process from rec to check and everything in between, whether it be a simple small dollar purchase going straight from requisition to PO, whether it be a purchase off contract and issuing a release against that contract, or whether it be a full formal complex procurement that has to go through a full solicitation life cycle. Through the new and integrated system, eliminating the need for rekeying certain information where interfaces or integration points didn't exist, thus preventing errors, really preventing errors at the point of entry. So oftentimes you'll find in your historical legacy system landscape that even though you may have interfaces in place, those interfaces are not necessarily real-time integration. And so you may do entry in one system. Let's pick on procurement for a minute. You might enter a requisition, you might enter a purchase order in a separate procurement system, whereby you go through review approvals and submit that, but it's then interfaced through a nightly process to the financial management system, where you're doing things like funds availability checking or recording your pre-encumbrances or in your encumbrances. And any of those of you on the phone who are in a similar type of landscape know and understand the challenges that present. First is the ability for transactions to reject unexpectedly. You didn't have sufficient funds available, whether that be a circumstance of you never had funds available, or maybe you had multiple transactions that posted against the same budget line during the day, but you were not quick enough to it as part of the batch interface process overnight. So it just creates a number of complicating factors, a number of different reconciliation challenges, and so eliminating those, moving to a new, modern, integrated system. And really, at the end of the day, in procurement, allowing the procurement professionals, again, whether that be procurement professionals within your central procurement office, or whether those be procurement professionals out at your agency department, allow them to spend more time doing procurement, negotiating with vendors, managing your contracts, reviewing and strengthening those relationships, and ultimately reducing the cost of goods and services. So really reducing the administrative burdens of procurement, let the more transactional focused activities flow out electronically, number one. Number two, the ability to empower your end users. So allow those end users in the agencies or departments to submit requisitions electronically. And given examples of purchasing off contract, eliminating the need for purchasing your buyers to be involved in those activities. Your buyers have already gone through the effort to negotiate the contract, agree to terms and conditions and pricing. Let your users simply shop against those contracts. So from an objectives perspective, the state was looking at this from a number of different user roles or user perspectives. First is the end user perspective. One of the primary goals and objectives here was to maximize user adoption. And they're able to do that through a simple, easy-to-use web interface and mobile-enabled solution. Again, those of you using historic legacy systems have been challenged with this, keeping the applications fresh and interesting to your end users and making them easy to use to help increase your adoption. A second objective that the state has is to remain current with their applications. They've struggled, again, as many of you have, to keep up with their software releases and have therefore fallen behind and made it difficult to stay current and continue to gain the benefits of your investment in whichever application you're focused on, in this case, procurement. Reducing the state support needs. The new solution they will be implementing here introduces a number of different self-service capabilities. So beyond simply opportunities to empower your end users in your department or agencies, it's also the ability to empower your vendor community. Ed talked about the vendor self-service solution that they're using in Kentucky. A similar solution will be used here in Alabama. And regardless of which solution you select, it's empowering those vendors to do things like register and maintain their accounts. You eliminate the need for your internal staff to do the data entry and maintenance of those accounts. Now, should that mean that you have to give up any and all control of those accounts? Well, absolutely not. Any modern vendor self-service solution today typically allows you as the responsible buying entity to review and approve those accounts before they're active within the solution. So you're not giving up control, but you're limiting some of that administrative benefit. Another example here is the ability for the vendors to upload their catalogs electronically. So again, let them set up and maintain their catalogs. They're certainly most familiar with what the details of their goods and services are, but yet provide your staff, your buyer, your contract administrator, your catalog administrator, depending on your organization, still get the opportunity to review and approve that content before making it available to your end users. Lastly, the state is looking to achieve immediate access to information. Through a new modern application with a new modern business intelligence solution, it provides them the ability to get access to information real time. Real time, whether it be transaction processing. So again, doing that real time funds checking we were talking about before, recording your pre-encumbrances or encumbrances real time as those transactions are being processed, or simply analyzing information, checking your budget balances, checking your spend activities through reports, dashboards, mobile intelligence, etc. So there are tremendous benefits that the state gets to look forward to as they move forward with their modernization initiative. Wrapping up with some of the lessons learned and some of the mitigation strategies as you consider e-procurement or as you look to expand your use of e-procurement. Certainly this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just some of the key things that we thought were important to share with you. And during the open Q&A, we'd be happy to address additional questions you may have. So we talked briefly before about the importance of a public sector solution. It's the ability for your selected solution, whether it be part of your ERP offering, whether it be a separate e-procurement solution, to support things like public posting, solicitations through a self-service portal, the ability for your vendors to respond to those opportunities. It's the ability to make information available to the public, again, through transparency portals, vendor self-service portals, etc. But it's also the ability to support other fundamental aspects of public sector procurement, and I'll pick on a few of those. The ability to support multi-year contracting, and that should include the ability to specify not only your start and end dates of your contract, but also to know and understand what portions of that contract are current year commitments and which portions of that contract are out year commitments, so that from a financial management perspective, the system can record the necessary encumbrances without forcing you to encumber the full contract value, or worse yet, not allowing you to specify all the details of the contract because you would then have to encumber them. Staying in the contracting area, other things that are important are things like retainage processing, the ability in your construction services or other certain spend categories, providing you with the ability to automatically capture and withhold retainage for those contracts, and then giving your buyers the flexibility to determine when and if those retainage values will be returned back to the vendors. So just a few examples of types of things that are important as you look for an e-procurement solution or look to extend your system to make sure that your selected system will support those initiatives. Next is defining and measuring your success. And this is a critical aspect of e-procurement. One of the driving factors is typically to reduce and improve operational efficiencies, and in other cases to look for hard dollar savings, whether it be in the forms of procurement card rebates or other processes like that. And the challenge that clients often face is, at the very beginning of this initiative, is knowing and understanding what their current landscape is. So to be successful, you want to first identify how are you going to measure success. Is it based on your improved cycle times? Is it based on the number of participating vendors on average in a sourcing event? Is it based on reduced cycle times? Is it based on reduced cost of goods and services? Whatever those key performance indicators are, and there's certainly many places you can get target KPIs, is first, identifying the list. Second, identifying your current state to the best of your ability. So if you want to improve cycle times, for example, from rec to order or order to receipt, it's being able to identify and measure what is your current state. Does it take you today on average to get 15 days from rec to order, or from order to receipt? Is that 7 days or 10 days? Oftentimes it's difficult to pinpoint that based on the lack of information available in your legacy systems. So if you find yourself in that situation, you're not alone. Measure those to the best of your abilities. And if you find yourself in a circumstance where you just don't have that data available, that's okay. But as you move forward into your initiative, start to capture that early on in the process and continue to measure that moving forward so that you get the true picture of what you're gaining, again, whether it be operational efficiencies or hard dollar savings. Next is the value of ERP integration. So we've talked about two different models. One model being all of your e-procurement and vendor self-service functionality is directly within your ERP, and the other model being a separate e-procurement solution or vendor self-service solution. Either model is okay. We know that you can cite organizations that have been very successful with both models. The important thing to note here is make sure if you're not having everything within your ERP that you do make it a priority to integrate your e-procurement solution with your ERP to gain the benefits of your funds checking, your pre-encumbrance and encumbrance postings, the ability to aggregate your spend, all of those things we talked about earlier. And what we found is oftentimes when you look at a separate e-procurement solution, you will look to phase that in. You'll look to gain some quick wins through probably a 3 or 4 month implementation cycle of limited functionality. And oftentimes you may do catalog shopping in your first phase against procurement cards as your payment method. But make sure that as you identify and you finalize that product roadmap and the implementation roadmap, that it does include integration with your ERP solution. Most practical, do real-time integration because you'll gain the greatest efficiencies. But if you have to do batch interfaces, that's okay too. Just don't lose sight of the importance of that activity. Moving on to your vendor community. When it comes to procurement and e-procurement in particular, you're not in a silo. It's not an operation that's performed only within the walls of your organization, whether it be your central procurement office, whether it be your central procurement office within your agency departments, your end users. There's certainly a critical aspect of the procurement equation, but an equally critical aspect is your vendor community. And as such, vendor outreach is essential. So whether you're standing up a vendor self-service portal, whether you're asking vendors to interact with you through electronic catalogs or other means, your outreach will be critical to the success of your e-procurement initiative. And outreach is more than simply sending some postcards saying, hey, we're going to do this. It's a plan in an organization and ongoing outreach to that vendor community. Certainly, postcard or email notifications are one way of reaching that vendor community, but look for other regular ways to communicate with them. Some examples of those being annual or regular conferences. Most of you have some form of annual procurement conference that you offer to your internal users, and you invite the vendor community to those conferences. That's a great way to communicate. Others of you have local outreach or local community organizations that help work with your vendor communities, whether it be your small and disadvantaged businesses or whether it be your large vendors. It's really sharing with them as much information and as frequently as you can to keep those vendors informed. Because at the end of the day, you need vendors who are willing and able to participate with you and participate with you in as electronic a fashion as they can in order for your internal staff to gain the benefits, but at the same time for those vendors to gain the benefits as well. So certainly communication, outreach, change management is important within your internal organization, but equally as important with your vendor community. The next item is targeting the right goods and services. This is a challenge we saw early on in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if you have 10 or 15 or 100 or 200 electronic catalogs in your e-procurement solution. If you don't have those goods and services that your agencies need the most, you're not going to be successful. the easier it is to access that specific set of goods and services, the more likely the users will be to use the system, and the more usage you'll get overall out of the system. So make sure you're working with your agencies, and you can do this, again, a number of different ways. Certain organizations will deploy procurement in a phased approach, not necessarily from a functionality perspective, and that's another way of phasing, but sometimes you'll also phase it from a usage perspective. So you might do a pilot with a certain number of agencies or departments, maybe 4 or 5, 6, something like that, and then move on to another set of agency departments and continue your rollout over a period of time. That can be a successful strategy for a number of different reasons. First is you can work out some of the initial kinks of your solution, whether it be technical concerns, whether it be help desk concerns, whether it be content within the solution, your goods and services, a whole host of different potentially complicated factors. And so you can improve things for each subsequent phase. The other thing it helps you with is just with your staff commitments. In almost every organization that I've worked with, you are challenged with staffing application implementation, whether it be in procurement, whether it be in financial management, HR payroll. You don't have extra people lying around typically that can be dedicated 100% of their time to an application implementation and the associated effort of that. So targeting the right goods or services, making sure you work with those users. So as you look to your agencies, look for their top 10 or 15 or 20 vendors, or their top 10 or 15 goods and services that are most important to them. In some cases, you may have that information readily available based on your current data source and your business intelligence capabilities. Whereas in other cases, you'll have to spend the time working with those agency departments as part of the implementation effort to gather that information early on. And I do say early on because as you work with these vendors, one of the things you'll find can be a challenge is their timeliness of responding to you. In some cases, they may very well be certainly interested and very capable of communicating with you electronically, but you need to get in their queue. It may not be important to get you up to the top of the queue, and you may wait 30 or 60 or 90 days until they can spend time with you and get enabled. The last item here is mandating usage. You go through the effort and the cost of implementing a procurement solution, and regardless of how much scope that solution entails, in order to get your maximum benefit, you want users to use the system. And the most effective way of doing that is mandating usage of the system, so that users are shopping against those contracts, so that you know what your spend patterns are, you know what your spend volumes are. You can leverage those to, again, drive down your cost of goods and services. It also provides you the visibility we talked about earlier. Looking for ways to increase participation through the vendor community. It may be for increased visibility into those areas that you might look to issue new contracts for. So mandating usage is a great way to do that. And secondly, when it comes to contracts specifically, issuing mandatory contracts. In certain cases, I've seen clients will issue a contract but make that contract an optional use contract. In some cases, users will choose not to use that optional use contract for, again, a very number of reasons. But at the end of the day, it's much less effective to you as an overall organization if your users are not being directed to and being required to use those contracts. Now, does that mean that you will issue a contract that will meet everyone's needs? Absolutely not. There will certainly be exceptions to those rules, but you do want to handle those on an exception basis rather than making that the norm. So again, just a few ideas of some of the key issues you may face, some of the lessons we've learned collectively over the years with eProcurement solutions, and some of the strategies you can use to mitigate those challenges. But certainly eProcurement provides some great opportunities. Many of you have already taken and moved forward with initiatives in the eProcurement area. Others of you are just beginning or are looking to ways to expand that. So we hope this information has been helpful to you this afternoon. And at this point, we will open it up for questions.
All right, Dale and Ed, thank you very much. Great presentation, very informative. As a reminder, we do have lots of time here for questions. Let me just run through the process. If you do have a question, We're allowing questions in a couple of different ways today. First of all, we're allowing audio through either your computer or your phone. And to ask your question, simply use the raise your hand function of our webinar software and simply click on the hand icon that's located in the toolbar. Just remember now, if you are using your computer, you must have a microphone for that process to work properly. Many of you have already been doing this, but if you prefer, you can simply type your question and send it to us using the Questions tab, also located in the webinar toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. So lots of time for questions. We obviously have a lot of experience in terms of our speakers here today with Dale and Ed, and I think they have a lot of good practical applications that they're ready and willing to share with you today. So let me start out, Dale, and I'll pose these questions to both of you, Dale and Ed, and maybe, Dale, you can comment from your perspective nationally with your clients, and then Ed, more specifically with your experience in Kentucky. But you know, if you're out there, as some of our attendees are, they're looking at this, they want to get started, but they're not really sure what the first steps are and what they should be thinking about early on in terms of just getting ERP, e-procurement, vendor self-service up and running. Can you share some of your helpful hints and your experience on just getting started? And Dale, why don't you maybe go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So for those of you who are looking for e-procurement and just don't know where to start, you know, the best place is to look at some of your peer organizations, those that have gone through this before. You know, certainly one of the first steps that you want to take is to define your requirements. You know, I mentioned at the beginning of this call that the scope of e-procurement can vary widely. Some of you will focus specifically on kind of the end-user shopping experience, the more transactional nature of that. Others of you will focus on the broader source-to-settle solution. I did mention earlier, some of you even will also look to integrate things like inventory management. So it's identifying first and foremost, what is the scope of your e-procurement initiative? You know, what is the kind of core functionality? And then within that, within each of those different core functional areas, what is important to you from a requirements perspective? And requirements can be functional in nature. They can also be technical in nature. So looking at things technically, one of the things you should ask yourself early on is, what are you looking for deployment model? You know, if you go back to the early days of e-procurement, one of the most common deployment models was an on-premise solution. And that simply means that you, as the buying organization, would install and configure and deploy e-procurement at your own data center and would maintain that with your own staff. That continues to be one deployment model, but we've also seen more current deployment models, whether it be a vendor-managed solution or a SaaS offering, a software as a service offering. So there's a number of different models you can choose, and picking the right one for you is something that you want to evaluate early on, because in certain circumstances, if you choose, for example, to move forward with a more modern deployment model, you have a vendor-managed or SaaS type of solution, it may require changes or even legislative changes in order to allow you to move forward in that type of fashion.
Thank you, Dale. Ed, what about you? When you first started thinking about this in Kentucky, what were some of the lessons learned or the things that you thought about first in getting started?
Well, when we looked at it in Kentucky, just sort of looking at it from the vendor self-service part, we, under some of our previous systems, we had a vendor table or a vendor file, and so the big part of that was converting that over so it could be used by web-based, and we had to expand it where we could collect a lot more information, but you need to collect banking information, your 1099 reporting information for the IRS, you know, email addresses. The vendors need to be able to go out and interact and use the system where they can, we assign them a password and a user ID so they have access to their own account and can update it. And and there's a lot of valuable information that we use on our vendor file for all of these processes, even to contact them, to know what commodities and so forth they can provide. So it really, if you have a starting point with a current vendor table that you can expand and or add to, you're well ahead of the game. But if you're starting from scratch, it takes a great effort, but a very worthwhile effort.
Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful, Ed. Let me ask you both again. First, Dale, from a national perspective and just your experience around the country, and then I'll come to Ed specifically with Kentucky. But what are some of the key obstacles that can impact the implementation timeline for e-procurement? I know there are many probably. What are some of the key ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some of the key obstacles can be, and I touched upon this a little bit earlier, is your vendor community and their, number one, willingness in some cases to participate, or their ability to participate based on your timeline. So let's start with willingness. One of the challenges you can face is depending on your funding model. Some clients have elected to do a vendor-funded model where vendors are assessed a transaction fee and sometimes registration fee associated with that. In those cases, it can make it less attractive for vendors to participate, and so you may run into some challenges there. So that's one thing I would suggest you consider. The other aspect I talked about is just getting vendors connected to the system. So particularly for your large vendors, they may be very e-procurement capable. Now, again, I'll use your computer hardware vendors, your MRO vendors, et cetera. They do this all the time. But similar to your circumstance, they have limited staff to support those initiatives, and they have a number of different buyer demands. So you will get in their queue, and one of the things you can do to help offset that, I guess, is look for multiple vendors in a spend category so that if one is unable to meet your timeline, you can swap in another vendor. I know Commonwealth, Kentucky in particular has done that on a couple occasions already. The other thing is your end users, your agencies, and their willingness and ability to move at whatever timeline that you want them to move on. Some of those challenges may be driven based off of your current system landscape. So if you have circumstances where you have different systems in place, agencies may be slow to agree to move off of those systems or to integrate those systems with your e-procurement initiative. In other cases, agencies may have their own other demands or priority lists. So they may be in the middle of a very important initiative, completely unrelated to e-procurement, and as such, they face staffing or other constraints. So you don't necessarily need to exclude them, but then this goes back to one of my earlier examples. Consider a phasing approach, where you target a certain number of agencies first, and then you bring on another set of agencies and so forth. This allows you to schedule that particular agency when they are open and available to work with you. So those are probably two of the key challenges that I would list.
And, Ed, anything? Go ahead.
Yes, from my standpoint, I guess one of the first things is the funding that probably many, let's say, states or cities have an issue with funding, which is what you would need. But the other part of it, if you have the funding and can do this, it's the change management piece, which is let's say agencies, if they've been doing something for years a certain way, it's difficult to get the change in place. So you've got to have a communications piece. You've got to have an education process. And we have done a lot of our through, let's say, conducting meetings with agencies and forming users groups and staying in contact. We started this process to having user group meetings some 15 years ago, and we still continue it for all of our upgrades and changes we're making. It's been very successful for us.
Ed, did you get a lot of pushback, just out of curiosity, from some of the agencies?
You do initially, but I think if you're trying to show them that this is a better way of doing business, this is the best practice, then you can win them over.
Yep. All right. Very good. I thought you'd probably mention funding as one of the key obstacles. That's usually the case.
Right.
All right, listen, we've got several questions in the queue from our audience today, and I appreciate these questions. Let me just run through them. The first one, Ed, I think the first few are kind of for you and your specifics in Kentucky, but what software, ERP software, are you using in Kentucky, and what version?
CGI 3.9.
Okay,
and we're working on an upgrade to go 3.10.
Very good. This next question, several questions in this, so I'll ask these one by one. And Ed, I'll start with you, and Dale, if you don't mind jumping in on each one of these and just give us a little bit of a national perspective. But first of all, it asked, did you experience fraud, Ed, in Kentucky?
We have only experienced some minimal fraud, as you always have, but none that was related actually to our financial system. So no fraud related to that. The fraud that has occurred has been sort of minimal amounts where someone may have purchased something that they shouldn't have or of that nature and took it for personal use.
Yeah, and then this person also asked, related to fraud, is that a major or a minor risk that you considered in your thought process?
Yeah, it's a major risk, and so you've got to really make sure that your system has good security, and that let's say only give the access to those, limited access to those users who need to have access to the system, and then build in other words, we sort of no one person can create a payment to themselves in our system. That's sort of the rule we have.
Mm-hmm. And Dale, just related to fraud, what do you see nationally? Are there states or governments, for that matter, that are implementing ERP, e-procurement, vendor self-service? Are you seeing much fraud? And again, just address the risk factor question.
Yeah, certainly. So fraud is always a risk and can take one of many different forms. One is in the procurement card use itself, and that's not necessarily a direct issue with the application you're using, whether it be e-procurement or ERP. It's just the procurement card program itself. And so you need to make sure you have the appropriate checks and balances in place to monitor that spend. It's really balancing that risk against the benefits that Ed highlighted earlier in the session with your transactional savings. The other area that you can get into more on the payment side of things, but can be indirectly tied to e-procurement, is paying vendors that shouldn't be paid. And so there's different strategies and techniques and even system processes with your banking relationships, your positive pay or reverse positive pay processes that you can put in place to try to minimize or eliminate that fraud. Again, I don't think it's a widespread problem. It's certainly checks and balances. And lastly, just reiterating what Ed said, it's making sure you have that segregation of duties in place where possible. Now, we recognize in many of your organizations it's something you can do. So the person who creates the purchase order doesn't also authorize the invoice or payment. Whereas you may still have some small organizations within your overall state or other organization that has a single person responsible for all administrative activities. And so they are entering the purchase order, they are entering the payment request, et cetera. And it's just making sure you do the appropriate post-audit functions to reduce or eliminate that fraud opportunity.
All right, thank you both. The same person, again, this is a multiple question here, multiple step, but this regards the procurement card. Let me start with you, Ed, first. What is the threshold of a single purchase on Kentucky's procurement card?
Excuse me, Kenny, go ahead again with that.
Yeah, the threshold for a single purchase.
Single purchase. Well, actually, it's usually $1,000 for a single purchase, but we do have a few cards authorized with higher limits. For instance, if they wanted to pay utility bills and if the utility company would accept the P card, then the value could be much higher on a single purchase, but those would be limited cards, and only a few would be that would be available for that use.
All right, very good. Let me stay with you, Ed. This person says, in our procurement card purchases, we need to pay the bank for the service of using procurement cards. How are you getting rebates from using the P card?
We do not pay the bank anything, but the bank are paying us approximately 1.07%, I believe, roughly in that range. We just signed a new agreement.
And you're not paying the bank. You're not paying the bank any fees. Is that correct?
We are not paying the bank any fees. That is correct.
Okay. Dale, I don't know if you can weigh in on either one of those from a national perspective. First, the threshold for single purchase on the procurement card is $1,000. Typically, what you see?
I've seen that vary as high as anywhere from $5,000 to even $25,000. I think I recall even one isolated circumstance where it may be up to $50,000 per transaction. So it varies from one organization to the next.
Anything you want to add on getting the rebates back using the P card? Anything you want to address there from a national perspective?
Sure. We've certainly seen this as becoming a much more popular program over the last probably 2 to 3 years in particular. Banks are offering the incentive program to use the P cards and to get the rebates, and they're getting paid. I believe in most cases they are turning around and assessing a fee to the vendor to offset some of those transactions. So the way the process works, at least, but the government organization typically is receiving some form of rebate, whether it's 1.7 or a different percentage point, will largely vary based on your transaction volumes.
All right, very good. The next question says, and again, I think this is for you, Ed, first, and then we'll go to Dale, but do the punch-out items automatically load into your requisition process, or are you forced to use P cards to pay for the items?
Actually, when you go to do a, let's call it a delivery order or a purchase order where you're selecting the items that you want to purchase, or similar to what you do on Amazon, when you select that, you select your if you use what we call a DOA 3 or a 4, whichever one of the orders that you're processing. One is the P card, and the other one is EFT or by check. So you can select the type of payment.
Okay, very good. Dale, anything on that?
Yeah, I think that's the important distinction to draw here is the punch-out process is really nothing more than facilitating your shopping experience. It allows your end users to connect to that vendor website. And again, some of the additional benefits of that vendor shopping experience, we talked about things are highly configurable. So your computer hardware, for example, if you allow your users to go out and shop and configure their laptop purchase or the desktop purchase, they can do that directly on the vendor website. So punch-out allows them to fill that shopping cart, and then the form of payment really is separate and apart from that. The punch-out process is set up such that your eProcurement or ERP system captures those line items from the shopping cart and brings them back into your system in the form of a request. Could be a requisition, could be a direct order, what have you, depending if you're purchasing off contract. And then as part of that existing process, you can determine, are you going to pay for those items via procurement card, or are you going to pay for those items in a traditional payment method and pre-encumber, encumber funds, etc.
All right, very good. Ed, the next question, I think, again, for you first, and then we'll go to Dale, but how did you implement e-invoicing?
We have not implemented that. We have looked at that, but we sort of thought that the effort and the vendors that would do that we would partner with was not worth the effort at this time.
All right, very good. Dale, are you seeing that anywhere else around the country, and how did they go about implementing e-invoicing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly is a very popular way to complete your procure-to-pay cycle, particularly for those vendors you're communicating with electronically, whether you're doing a punch-out, shopping experience with them or just sending them electronic orders. And what you'll find is really that there's two different categories of vendors and what can be termed e-invoicing. One is the vendor's ability to create an electronic invoice, and that's commonly made available through your vendor self-service solution. And the common way of approaching that is what's referred to as a PO flip. If the user, in this case the vendor user, selects the purchase order contract they want to invoice against, and then they enter the information associated with the invoice, and it's communicated electronically to your internal staff for review and approval. The other way of doing that is through true electronic communication in a format like EDI or another industry standard electronic format, where you receive something directly from that supplier system into your ERP or e-procurement system. Once again, you have the necessary reviews and approval in place prior to turning around and issuing the payment to that vendor. But it can certainly improve operational efficiencies dramatically. Internally for the buying organization, it can help eliminate the data entry activities and allow your staff to simply be focused on review and approval activities. And then from the vendor community perspective, certainly streamlines their operations and also increase the payment turnaround time.
All right, very good. This question, I think, specific, I believe, to transportation. It goes, how do you comply with FTA procurement policies and procedures in your punch-out purchases?
When you say SCA,
it's FTA. I believe
oh, excuse
that.
Me.
Yeah.
Federal Transportation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, we have delegated to our transportation cabinet the ability to do many of their own contracts, so they would have that responsibility. But on the punch-out part, why the transportation cabinet is treated just like any other agency. If they go out and order off of the contracts, then they're treated like any other agencies. And if there's some special reporting they have to do to the Federal Highway Administration, that is their responsibility, and I do not know how they would report.
All right, very good. Thank you. Dale, anything on that, FTA procurement policies and procedures, and specifically how it relates to punch-out purchases?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is what Ed was describing, is that the punch-out is merely a shopping experience and a way to communicate. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for your underlying contract vehicle, and that vehicle can be used to meet various terms and conditions. Some of them might be DOT related.
All right, next question comes from Virginia. Let me just read it. And Ed, I think this you can go first on this. There has been a little light on the vendor self-service topic. Please cover the challenges and your methods of handling processes and discrepancies in data obtained from vendors for purposes of purchasing, as opposed to specific information needed for payment, for example, W-9s, EDI, banking, etc.
Maybe some of the issues you have with, let's say, vendors sometimes fail to, an employee leaves and we're using their email address when an employee leaves, and they do not go out there and update the file. So we have, in a sense, if we're trying to send notifications to them by email, they will be returned to us, and we will have lost email contact. That doesn't mean we've lost contact with the vendor, only email contact. Sometimes we will have phone information, other contact information, and the vendors sometimes fail to update those. And we have a help desk that helps with, let's say, training, helps agencies in processing documents, helping vendors register. And so we have a lot of calls that are vendor related to our help desk, and so we realize that there's a great advantage of having the, let's say, all the information that we have on vendors. So we are glad to provide the help desk service to keep them up to date as we can.
Dale, anything else there?
Yeah, this is certainly a very common challenge, and it can be a challenge from at least a couple of different perspectives. One is from just an organizational perspective and areas of responsibility. So one of the examples you gave was collecting your banking information. So one of the questions commonly asked is, should that information be captured through the vendor self-service solution within eProcurement? In some cases, the answer is yes. In other cases, the treasurer or other responsible individual for banking information says no. That should really be set up and maintained within your ERP or financial management system. So first is identifying those kind of areas of responsibility, and then secondly can be application issues or challenges. In some cases, the solutions won't support that data capture, and they will rely instead on the ERP or financial management solution to set up and maintain and establish that information. Whereas other vendor self-service solutions will allow the data capture and then allow the client to do the necessary review and approval. In the case of banking information, do your pre-note processes, etc.
All right, very good. Also, staying with Virginia just for a second, it says, additionally, vendors often enter incorrect information through self-service that must be validated and corrected through other processes. Please discuss your solutions to ensure vendors do not override through self-service information otherwise corrected through non-self-service processes.
Our setup in Kentucky is that the vendor goes out and enters the information or changes the information, but that is in a hold status until we review it and release that to our vendor file.
Is that consistent, Dale, with what you see in other governments?
Yes, most governments will have a review and approval process in place. It's one of the trade-offs. Certainly the challenges there, vendors are putting in incorrect information. Part of that process, as you're correcting the information, should be communicating back to the vendor some of the incorrect information, alerting them to that fact. If they continue to update that information incorrectly, the review and approval process should be in place to catch that incorrect data.
Very good. I'm going to stay with Virginia. One more question. How do you handle non-procurement AEs in your ERP system?
Well, we have what we call a miscellaneous vendor, or maybe a one-time payment. And if that payment happens to be a 1099 reportable item, we capture that over on our 1099 reporting file. And at the time of payment, all the information has to be provided, like federal ID number, name, address, and so forth. So there is a way of capturing, if you want to call them the one-time payment vendors. We prefer that most everyone be set up as a regular vendor and do not encourage the one-time vendors, but there's a way of dealing with them.
Dale, what do you see nationally on that?
Yeah, so that, again, historically can be a challenge, and it gets back to kind of the areas of responsibility or source of truth, if you will. So typically, eProcurement and vendor self-service solutions associated with that are responsible for the procurement vendors, and so we see or encourage clients to use that to capture those procurement-based vendors. But we recognize that any public sector organization will have a large pool of vendors that are not related to the procurement function. It might be social service recipients or other things of that nature. Those vendors are typically set up and maintained directly by client staff within the vendor profile area of your ERP or financial management solution. And as you're setting up your interface of integration to pass vendor information between eProcurement and your ERP or financial management solution, it tends to be a one-way feed. So at the end of the day, your financial management system or ERP really is a book of records for all vendors, although procurement vendors flow initially in from the self-service solution associated with eProcurement.
Okay. Very good. Dale, I think this one might be best for you. It goes like this. When a company is trying to integrate older systems, for example, ERP, procurement, accounts payable, from various systems, but primarily mainframe, et cetera, what are some of the challenges that a government agency or a government could face during implementation of ERP, e-procurement, and vendor self-service?
If I understand the question correctly, it's an existing public sector organization wanting to move from a legacy mainframe-based system to a modern ERP and or e-procurement system. Is that correct?
I think it starts out when a company is trying. In other words, maybe the vendor is trying to integrate their older systems. What are some of the challenges that governments face during implementation?
Well, governments would typically interact with the company or supplier, if you will, in the procurement process. The first would be vendor self-service, where they would be receiving notifications and be able to browse for business opportunities or respond to those opportunities. Really, when it gets to communicating, I guess, between a vendor system and your maybe state-level system, would be sending purchase orders, receiving invoices, things of that nature. So it's really working with that vendor to determine what their technical capabilities are. You may choose to send them email notices. You may choose to send them more traditional flat file purchase orders rather than modern CXML purchase order as an example. So it's certainly not something that can't be overcome, but it certainly would warrant working directly with that vendor to understand their technical capabilities and how to best communicate with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you hit upon it. I mean, just communication is definitely the key. Next question, Ed, I think, again, for you, the question is about fraud. And obviously, a lot of our attendees and participants today are worried about fraud. But how has the Kentucky system been set up such that bogus vendors cannot be set up, first of all, and then get paid? Again, just this whole notion around fraud and how do you limit fraud. I think the concept of vendor self-service strikes a little bit of fear in people's mind and opens the door for more fraud.
Well, we have not, let's say, experienced any losses that we know of where that there was a fictitious vendor out there, because number one, when you're setting up a vendor file, and for a vendor, you quite often are setting up banking information, and when they do that, they have registered, let's say, to bid on, let's say, various commodities that we may be acquiring, and so when a vendor has to have provided a service, and that service has to be received, and let's say someone in an agency needs to sign off that they received it, let's say create the payment document, somebody else, or maybe in some cases a couple of other individuals will approve those payments, and so there's sort of a built-in check and balance there that would prevent that type of fraud. Now, I think some of the types of fraud that has happened is where someone goes out and gets a vendor information, name, address, maybe change the name somewhat, and create a fake type invoice, and someone does not do a good job of reviewing an invoice and approves it, it gets paid. We have not experienced that.
Okay. Dale, anything else you'd like to talk about regarding the fraud risk?
Yeah, I think Ed hit upon it. It's really with your internal reviews, internal control processes. And I think you're subject to fraud whether you're doing business electronically through e-procurement or not. A couple of the areas that he spoke to, first, reviewing and certifying your vendor. Simply by enabling vendor self-service and the ability for a vendor to establish and maintain their account doesn't eliminate your responsibility to review and activate that vendor. A simple example being tax ID check or other aspects of that, and individual processes will vary from one client to the next. And then as you go through the rest of the transaction chain, it's certainly having those review and approvals in place. So again, whether you're receiving paper information or whether you're receiving electronically, you still need the appropriate controls.
Very good. I have a few more questions in the queue. I think we can get through them all. Ed, did you put out an RFP for your P-card?
Yes, and we just put out probably our third one and awarded a contract about a year ago on a new P-card contract.
Very good. And Dale, I suspect nationally you see that most governments put out an RFP for their P-card.
Yes, they do. And what's interesting is sometimes that will be separate and apart from their banking services.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ed, how many vendors are registered in Kentucky's ERP system, and how many staff do you have within the help desk to support the vendors?
Actually, we have about 7 individuals in our help desk, but they don't just help vendors. They do training, they work with our upgrades, they do all kinds of things, and so whoever is available accepts the call on the vendors, and we have maybe 3 or 4 individuals that sort of can help vendors, but it doesn't take that many. It's let's call it a half a day, a half of a FTE daily or something like that. So it's not.
And how many? Pardon? How many vendors roughly are registered with the system?
Well, the way we count our vendors are a little deceiving, but it's we probably have 180,000 in our file, but we're only doing business with a certain portion of that number, and then if we haven't, let's say, done business with them for a couple of years, we use the take them off the file. And but that's the number we have out there if you did a count today.
Dale, you deal with a lot of different governments. What's kind of the range you see in terms of the vendors that are registered with a system and just the total FTE effort that's required?
And let me, before Dale gets, let me explain a little who we include in vendors, region search number. Let's say all of our local governments, all of our counties, the cities, and everything else are in that vendor file. They are not vendors, but that gets to the 180,000 or so. And it might be true vendors. We're talking a range of maybe 20,000. That's a guess. So Steve,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly from a vendor count perspective, and as Ed says, it depends how you slice the information and count vendors. I've seen, at the state level or large municipality level, anywhere from 25,000 vendors in the vendor file. I think the largest I saw was in the neighborhood of about 400,000 vendors. So it really depends. Sometimes those will be payees rather than procurement vendors, and so depending how you count them. From a help desk support perspective, it really varies, based on the capabilities of your system, the complexity of your system, the number of vendors you have there. But anywhere from 1 to 2 to maybe 3 to 5 help desk staff, again, performing more than just direct vendor support. They're often shared responsibilities in providing internal user support as well.
Very good. Dale, this question for you. Ed talked about the catalogs that they put online in Kentucky, but is there a right number of electronic catalogs that you should make available?
Yeah, that's another great question. And the short answer is there isn't a magic number. So there is effort involved, whether you're going to do locally hosted catalogs, which means you're going to set up and maintain all those line item details within your system, or whether you do the punch-out scenario where the vendor sets up and maintains that information. So there's work to be done. I've seen anywhere from as few as 5 to 10 punch-out catalogs. I think Commonwealth, Virginia is up in the 250 or maybe 300 punch-out catalogs. And then total catalogs, yeah, certainly 1,000 or better for a large organization is possible, and we've seen that in multiple places. When it comes to catalogs and determining when is it right for electronic catalogs, when is it right for punch-out, it's really assessing multiple factors. One is are you issuing a multi-year contract? Because in many cases, vendors have an investment as well to set up and maintain electronic connection to you. And so if you do a multi-year contract, it's more enticing to them. Secondly is based on your transaction volume. You gain the greatest efficiencies and your vendors gain the greatest efficiencies through high volumes of electronic transactions. So if you have a $50 million contract and you're doing 3 purchase orders a year, that's not a good candidate. Whereas if you've got a $50 million contract and you're doing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of transactions a year, that's a great candidate for electronic catalogs. So it's really finding that right balance. And then secondly, it's finding those right spend categories. Some, again, are very natural. We talked about some already today, that the computer hardware, your MRO vendors, things of that nature, where some of the more specialty things may be less incenting for the end users as they're shopping for goods or services.
Yeah. In Kentucky, Ed, are you satisfied with the number of electronic catalogs that you have now? Are you considering any changes?
Well, we're going to grow to 10 and let it sit there just a little while and then see where we go. And we, an office supply contract is probably where you get some of the greatest value in these, because there's numerous transactions, and right now we have an office supply contract, but the office supplier does not want to go to punch out, so we have a similar type arrangement with them. They just didn't want to go the punch out route at this time.
Ed, this question just came in. Do you require TINs, tax identification numbers, and W-9s and validate for all registering vendors, or do you wait until the vendor actually does business with Kentucky to obtain information necessary for payment as opposed to just purchasing?
Well, when they register, they need to put their federal ID number on the registration, and we have a certification on their vendor self-service where that is the equivalent of the form that the IRS requires. So that we have a substitute W-9 out there for them to fill out, and they certify that their information is correct. Okay.
And any validation other than that certification process?
Actually, there's the IRS has a database that you can run all of your federal ID numbers against, and if you have issues or problems, you can work from there. And so we take that route.
All right, very good. Last question, guys, and I saved this one for last because I really like this one. It's simple, but I think it really says a lot. Are your vendors happier with the new process? Ed, you want to go first? Have you heard from your vendor?
Yes, I think they are, because we have better, quicker communications with our vendors. Let's say the availability of what we are trying to acquire from them. They can see the products out there, and we let's say there's less opportunities for protests if we get all the communications to them and they communicate back to us. So I think we're all happier. And the other thing is that we probably get the payments to the vendors quicker because we have a vendor self-service and the vendor table set up so that we can pay them on time, not before, because we can set up the payment as to the pay date they're supposed to be paid.
Dale, I suspect that's what you hear nationally, but would you like to comment?
Yes, I would say overall that vendors are happier with eProcurement PET solutions for all the reasons Ed's described. The other thing is they can also be introduced to other buying entities. As soon as they get into the procurement arena, they are better enabled to work with other buying entities and therefore increase their business.
Very good. Well, I think we got through every single question that we had in the queue, and I just want to thank our speakers, Dale and Ed. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and your experience. And Dale, if you would advance that slide for me, one, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. There we go. Thank you. That concludes our webinar on e-procurement and vendor self-service. Again, I just want to thank Dale and Ed again for taking time and sharing their knowledge and experience with us. And many thanks also to A.J. Puryear of our NASACT staff who helped make today's event possible. Before we go, as you can see on your screen, we need to confirm attendance for individual participants one more time. And it's a little bit different test this time. If you would, type in the questions box, I have completed the webinar. Again, simply type in, I have completed the webinar. And once you type that in, make sure you hit the send button, and that way we will have a written record document of your attendance. Now, again, this does not apply to groups. Your attendance will be confirmed by your room monitor. Just as a reminder, for those of you wishing to claim CPE for today's training event, please don't forget to complete and mail your CPE forms as well as the sign-in sheet to NASACT. The mailing address is listed at the bottom of your sign-in sheet. And for those of you in group settings, please don't forget to have your room monitor sign the sign-in sheet attesting to everyone's attendance today. One last thing, we are using an electronic evaluation form in an effort to make our processes more efficient. Room monitors, please make sure that you provide the link to the evaluation form to everyone in your group, and those participating as individuals should have received the link to the evaluation form directly. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar today and found it to be a cost-effective way to obtain training in our continued economic times that we're in. An electronic recording of today's event can be found on our website online bookstore, our website's online bookstore starting tomorrow. In terms of future events, NASACT's next webinar is scheduled for July 23rd. It will be our annual GASB review 2014. More details on that webinar can be located on our website, which is www.nasact.org. The Association of Local Government Auditors is hosting a webinar next week, June 3rd. The topic will be Elements of an Audit Finding. And more information on that webinar can be found at ALGA's website, which is www.algaonline.org. And lastly, our colleagues at the Association of Government Accountants, or AGA, is conducting a webinar May 7th entitled Procurement Management. More details on that event, along with other AGA training events, can be found on their website, agacgfm.org. If anyone has a specific topic that you would like for us to address on a future webinar, please email me that suggestion at kpointer, K-P-O-Y-N-T-E-R, at nasact.org. We'd certainly be happy to give your topic serious consideration for a future webinar. Again, I think that's it. Let's go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank our speakers, Ed and Dale, one last time. Great job, very informative. And want to thank all of you participating today for joining us. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.